Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Unlock Data in Your SaaS Applications. Build SQL access to your SaaS application this week. With us today is Dion Pico, Senior Director, Product Marketing, and Dennis Bennett, Senior Systems Engineer. I'd like to hand today's session over to Dion.
Thank you very much, Marlis. So good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're located, of course. I want to take you through a great interesting topic today, actually, around SaaS connectivity and SaaS data access, really. A topic that here at Progress DataDirect we certainly field a lot of responses on, and we're certainly guiding a lot of customers on. So I want to take you through really what we see in the industry today, some of the challenges that we see really being repeated over and over, the questions and challenges that really companies pose to us. I'm going to introduce it by saying, how do companies like NetSuite and HP provide real-time BI access to their applications, allow them to easily integrate with ETL processes, and really standardize their data integration? Well, that's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to show you how these companies have really made that data access transformation for their custom applications, and we'll kind of show you how you can do that as well this week. So great solution for you all if this is a pain point for you. As I said, we're gonna really cover the challenges of data integration, really the limitations around APIs with respect to data access and data connectivity. Going to look at what custom connectivity really looks like. We'll go into some of the technical details of that as well. Dennis is going to give you a demo of this and really show you how you can take this on and really build it for your own application as well. I'll briefly talk about, for anybody who's building an application on the Force.com platform, how it's even easier to be able to get this. There's some pre-built solutions in place today that you can take advantage of. And then at the end of the session, we'll certainly do a wrap-up and some questions. So as Marla said, so with that, let me proceed. This webinar, as I said, is really focused on the SaaS application space, vendors who are building SaaS applications. That's where we get a lot of questions and a lot of requests for guidance as well. But, just to be clear, if you're building an on-premise application as well, this is equally applicable. So, no reason to tune out if you're not building a SaaS application. What I would say, though, however, is that the adoption of SaaS applications has certainly skyrocketed over the last few years. This is really a trend line based on Forrester's research as well. If you extrapolate it out, I mean, you can certainly see that really the projection is in 2014, your average company, your average IT department is really using 16 plus SaaS applications in their environment. So, again, really supports the fact that SaaS application adoption has skyrocketed. It creates new challenges for IT departments or for companies as well, though, who are adopting this. Really challenges that did not always exist with on-premise applications have become much more acute right now, given the adoption of SaaS and really the silos of data that they create in a lot of circumstances. The number one challenge we see, of course, is really how do I do business intelligence and analytics integration into my SaaS application? Certainly most SaaS applications are multi-tenant enabled, and that certainly creates a challenge in its own right. Vendors really don't want to expose the database itself to be able to connect up BI as well. So this does create a number of challenges. What we hear over and over, basically, from users, how do I connect my favorite BI tool? And that's a BI tool, whether it's Excel, Tableau, ClickView, MicroStrategy, you name it. Whatever your customers are using, how do I connect that favorite tool to my application or to your application? If they do, or if they're able to connect, or if they're looking at, maybe they have connectivity to the database, for example, they'll say things like, your schema is too complex. It's too terse for my business analyst to understand. You've built a schema that's really designed to bring high performance transaction processing to an application. It's really not designed for the business analyst who really needs, more of a business vocabulary or a business friendly schema, if you will. From vendors, we hear things like, how do I expose this multi-tenant data while at the same time preserving the security and privacy for each of the tenants in my ecosystem or within my application as well. Not a trivial challenge in all circumstances, especially when you're simply exposing the database. Or finally, how do I expose my data without really having to radically change my roadmap plans. I don't want to involve myself into a real complex, high-cost, drawn-out development cycle to support this. I really need a fast and easy solution to be able to deliver what these users and what my customers are expecting. And so, that's certainly the number one use case I see. I see a number of others as well. You have an application, they want to start integrating it into their ETL processes. So really, how do I make it easy to integrate your application, whether it's SaaS or on-premise, with my ETL processes and my data warehouse? Or maybe my customer wants a data escrow strategy. Most SaaS vendors that I'm familiar with don't have a data escrow plan, and yet customers are really, really concerned about having a copy of their data. So how do I provide them with that ability, whether a free or as an add-on offering? As a SaaS vendor, I could certainly look at. And then finally, things like data backup, data migration. How do I take my on-premise application, move it to the cloud? How do I take a snapshot of my customer data so I can use it as a baseline, for example? Maybe further down the line, I want to measure my KPIs. Maybe I want to replicate it to another database, but I do need to do certain enforcements. Again, tenancy enforcement being a great example. We see many more use cases than this as well, but I would certainly characterize, the BI and analytics as number one, and really these next three as some of the other challenges that people face, and we certainly hear that feedback over and over. And so, when I speak to business leaders, whether I'm at a conference or visiting them face to face, often they'll refer to the fact that they have an API strategy. Maybe they've gone through the past 18 months of really being sold on the value of APIs, and now they believe that APIs are supposed to solve this problem. And if you look at the API growth out there, you certainly see that a lot of companies are putting a lot of weight behind APIs, of course. And so from a business perspective, it's no surprise that, they believe APIs are really the way to go here. But the truth is that's not always the case. When you think about APIs, when you think about whether they're supposed to solve the problem, and again, when I'm referring to APIs here, I'm very much referring to really REST and web service-based APIs, which really is the de facto standard of integration today with SaaS applications. Who are they solving that problem for? And the reality is they're designed for developers. And so if you're a developer, a REST API can be an excellent way to do provisioning, to do integration, workflow integration, process integration. But when you need to start exposing that application data to the business analyst, to the applications, data-centric applications they use, such as Tableau, for example, or Business Objects, SAP, you really see the limitations here that APIs are not the answer. They are simply only designed for developers. And again, I'm not meaning to bash APIs here. We're a big lovers of APIs. Certainly we're tech geeks as well, and we love our APIs, but at the same time recognizing that it's not one solution for everybody. And so really there has to be a better way here, a way that really allows business analysts to accomplish their jobs without custom integrations, without having to go back to IT or you as the vendor each and every time, and really being able to plug it in. You want to be able to integrate it into your environment, into your ecosystem, and again, undertaking a complex custom integration is not the solution most people require. And so really the answer is, if you look into space today, the standard for data access and data integration is really around SQL and providing SQL connectivity to your application in the form of an ODBC or JDBC interface being the two primary ones we see, of course, but ADO.NET or OLADB if you're in the Microsoft world as well. These are the standards that really unlock the data in your application, and they really help you standardize your data access. They're really ubiquitously supported by virtually every data-centric tool. Every BI tool I know pretty much supports ODBC or JDBC. Every data warehouse would support one of those interfaces, certainly ODBC being the most popular there. When it comes to things like high volume, high performance data integration, when you're doing bulk loads of data, certainly very common in a BI scenario, a SQL-based approach is also the right answer as well because it's optimized for those use cases. And really, this is the way you can open your application up to more than just developers. And so that SQL-based approach, that's really what we promote here, is really fundamental to your application architecture. I actually tell companies, many times that, I think every application needs two interfaces. You need an application programming interface, and REST has become really the standard, certainly within SaaS today. Great for provisioning, great for configuration management, and great for workflow, very much BPM, ESB type of integration. But you also need a data-centric interface as well. So, when you get into those BI scenarios that we've talked about already, or ETL integration scenarios, the data interface becomes the preferred way of connectivity. So think of it that way. Every application really needs to think about the two interfaces they want to provide. And today the world is really focused on the REST side of it only. And we really propose that the SQL interface, again, ODBC, JDBC, or some of the other interfaces, it's really a way that you can bring standardization to every data-centric project that your customers want to undertake. And so what I want to introduce you to today is called the Progress DataDirect Open Access SDK. This will allow you to build custom SQL connectivity to your application. And so what the Open Access SDK really does is really help you rapidly build really high quality, high performance custom drivers for your application. Open Access, of course, provides the majority of the code you need to build that. You just need to fill in really just some pieces of the template. You can do that in C, C++, Java, or .NET as well. And Dennis will actually show you some nice shortcuts along the way here in a second. And the beauty, of course, is that you really just need to manage one code base. So if you build your driver, again, C, C++, Java, .NET, you're writing your code once, but you can actually generate a number of different driver interfaces. ODBC, JDBC, OLE, and .NET as well. So one code base gives you, really all of the interfaces you'll need. So a great way to really start to accelerate that SQL interface that your application needs. I think the primary interface should be pretty clear right now, is that your customer's BI tools, and you really can't predict in a lot of cases what BI tool your customer prefers. You really want to be able to support them all. Through DataDirect Open Access and that custom integration, you really can support them all because it brings standards-based connectivity. You're going to support really ANSI 92 standardized SQL with your application so that any other data-centric tool can immediately plug into it. Very, very easy solution. Helps you deliver a solution to market much more quickly than you would by yourself, certainly with much higher performance as well. The end result, of course, is here when you're starting to implement this, you're not connecting directly to the database. So most databases, if you're using an Oracle or SQL Server or a MySQL or a Postgres type of database, most of those already provide an ODBC or JDBC driver with the database. But the problem is, of course, that they connect you directly to the database, and that's not always ideal. You often want to connect through your business logic layer. You want to be able to do custom security, custom enrichment. Maybe you just want to, really inject some custom logic into that processing. Maybe you have a custom multi-tenancy implementation, for example, where, one of your fields is the tenant ID. Connecting directly to the database, you lose all of that control. You lose all of that security and privacy. And so a custom connectivity that really goes through your business logic layer gives you full control to do anything you need. You can enforce your security. You can enforce pretty much any connectivity rule that you want to enforce. As I said, you can really expose your complex schemas much more simply. You can really expose more of a logical schema, a schema that's designed for the business analyst. Very easy to read. The fields that they don't need, for example, the ones that are really around transaction processing, you can remove those from the schema as well and really provide them a very simplified schema, or really provide them multi-tenant data in a very secure and reliable way. And of course, again, fully standards-based, so that not only these use cases, but any other data-centric use case that your customers demand, you have standardized data access with that as well. So NetSuite, great example. I referred to NetSuite at the beginning. NetSuite, as you know, is a very popular SaaS application, and their customers were demanding that they really provide them BI access to it. The information in NetSuite application to the customers effectively looked like a silo of data. but it was important business data that they would need to analyze in order to gain insight, in order to really optimize their operations. And so what NetSuite chose is really the Open Access SDK that we're talking about here to help them provide that standards-based data connectivity. Some of the things that NetSuite said is, Open Access provided us with a very simple programming model, 3 to 18 methods that translated into a quick learning curve and a very fast product development. And our customers are saying that they absolutely need it. They, under no circumstance can you remove this interface because it is so critical to my business. So it's one of those interfaces that really have pleased the NetSuite customers, really driven customer satisfaction as well. And at the same time, because it is standards-based, it really simplifies the challenge for NetSuite, not just for the existing use cases, but really forward-looking data-centric use cases as well. Great use case. So what does it take for the developer to implement something with the Open Access SDK? At the bare metal, if you're getting right down to the core and its lowest level of programming, we really expose just 12 methods. There's a few others you can play with as well, but there's really just 12 methods you need to implement. And as a matter of fact, only 4 are core to building a basic driver. And you can see those listed as well. So you can really query the driver to see what operations are supported, really handle a connection and a disconnection of a client to the driver, and really the method that handles an execution of a SQL statement. So really just 4 methods to build your basic driver. And again, if you're building a read-only driver versus a read-write driver, it becomes even more simplified because your execute model has to handle a lot less use cases. And then, of course, there's these optional methods you can really support as well if you want to provide expansive capabilities within your driver. Certainly for things like rollback and commits and all those other good techie things that Dennis will cover in a second as well. But that's at the low level. I mean, there's another layer here as well, and that's really accelerators, such as like our REST IP wizard, which make it even easier to build the driver. And the REST IP wizard, which is available in the latest version of Open Access, is a framework that allows you to build a driver really from any REST data sources that you have today. So really you provide it the metadata information, such as the data source information and your schema information. And this framework will generate all of the source code you need to really build that driver. And again, I'm going to bring Dennis into the conversation now because certainly we're going to go beyond my technical abilities really quickly here. So I'm going to turn the ball over to Dennis quickly, and he's going to take you through some more of the details here of really just how easy it is, how these accelerators can bring you forward and show how you can build a custom driver for your application to, again, support those BI, ETL needs or any other data-centric use case. So with that, Dennis, I'm going to hand it over to you, and why don't you wow us with your prowess?
Okay, good. I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop. And what I'm going to show you today is I'm actually going to take the REST IP generator and just go through the user guide and do the tutorial, basically the installation verification program, which if you guys chose to trial this, this would be a real simple way to get started with this. And then beyond that, you would probably want to go ahead and interface against your own REST API. But we're going to start with in here. There's a tutorial, and that tutorial goes against a Marvel REST API, so the Marvel Comics API, and I'll show you how that works. As far as the prereqs, it's fairly simple here. You can see JDK 1.6 or higher. You'll need to install the Open Access SDK, which Dion mentioned. 7.2 is the GA version, and you'll need to install either or both an ODE or JDBC client to access that server. For this demo today, I'm going to use ODBC. So real quick before we get started, let me just show you what that Marvel portal looks like. So in the doc itself, it has URLs to get to this, but you can see from this interactive documentation, I'm actually going to, for this verification, I'm going to go against this comics API here, And really what that's going to do is just return some information about the comics that Marvel has done over the years, and there's many years of comics here. And you can see some of the output as far as what's coming back from it. You can see the ID of the comic, the digital ID if it has one, the title, description information about it, and so forth. So that's one of them. And there was also another one out there as far as creator, and that would be just the actual creator of the comic itself, and we can see that. The other thing before you can get started is you'll actually need to get a login to marvel.com, and you can either do it via your email address or you can do it via a social account. But when you do that, it's going to generate a private key and a public key for you, and that will be absolutely necessary to actually test. You can do the test APIs from that web page I was on before, but also you'll need to plug those public and private keys into your code to actually authenticate when you do that. Okay, so let's get started. As Dion mentioned, really the REST IP generator requires a couple things. So let's look at those. Some of that is information about the schema itself, and some of it is actually information about what you want, what the columns will look like as far as what's coming back. So if we go here and look in webinar, and if we look at my webinar properties, you can see I'm going to create a database called webinar, catalog called mcatalog, and the schema itself will be webinar. This is just telling it where to find the schema information, which we'll look at in a second. This will describe the two kind of virtual tables I'm going against. These are not actual tables, but there will be one for comics and one for creator based on the output of those REST APIs that we just looked at. And this is just telling where to go ahead and write the source code that it's going to write. And, you know, originally I heard it'll generate about 80% of the code you need to do this. I didn't actually count, but I did kind of look at the code that was generated and look at the code that was necessary, and I highlighted the changes. And we can look at that, and you can just kind of visually get a feel for that. The other thing is we point to the URL for kind of the base URL for those REST APIs. The other thing we want to look at is under schema, I need to describe exactly what these tables look like. So, and of course, comic isn't a real table, but I'm exposing it as a virtual table. And you can see the table name here. You can see the different columns. And the data types, I actually got that from some of our manuals, but basically 4 here is an integer. So we've got a couple integers here. -9 is a WVarchar, and this 8 here is a double. So I'm giving information about what those columns in this virtual table will look like. I'm giving also information about what the index is. And in this case, going back to that API, we can see that the column name ID is a way to kind of get faster access through the REST API to the underlying data. And finally, I'm going to expose this ID as a foreign key, which will be accessible to the other table, which is here, this creator one. And you can see it's a little bit simpler, but they both share an ID. And this will enable us to go ahead and do some joins across those two virtual tables. So that's what I start with. And then the next thing I will want to do is go ahead and run this REST API generator, which will go ahead and start, give me as far as we can get with the source code itself. So let's go ahead and run it. So you can see it went ahead and built a number of Java programs for me. Some of these will need to go in and modify. Some of them, particularly the common ones, we don't need to do anything with. But so if we go ahead and look, it actually built it here for me. And you can see there's a number of common routines. And these are just really utilities that are standard for pretty much anything, any kind of REST API. If we look at the things that are more unique to the specific Marvel API, we can see things like this connection helper thing here. This is something we'll need to modify. This one we're going to actually put in those custom properties I mentioned before, that being the public and private key. Also, this request processor will need some changes too. So if we wanted to go ahead and look, so for example, here's that connection helper we looked at before. And if we look at it, only the stuff that is highlighted is things that I had to change. And as you do this installation verification yourself, you'll see we actually already have a Marvel one built there, so you really don't need to write this code yourself. You can go ahead and copy it in. And you can see I'm grabbing from some custom properties that I'm defining to the server, the public key and the private key, and I'll show you how I go ahead and do that. And if for some reason either or both are missing, I'm just going to send back an error message. Another one that we actually changed here is this request processor. The request processor, this is actually, I need to modify this one to change the request before I go ahead and send it. So you can see, again, the things in highlighted yellow are things that I had to update or change. And you can see I'm just going ahead and setting it up, and I'm going ahead and inserting the public and the private key. And pretty much that's all required there. And the connection utility, this is actually a brand new program that was built, and really you can see it's just doing some kind of standard stuff that we would need to go ahead and invoke this REST API. And finally, a couple more. We have the data processors, and you can see I have one for the comic table and one for the creator table. We'll just look at one of them. A couple changes. I went ahead and imported a couple new imports here, this REST IP also. And you can see I check here to see, are we going in with that unique key, this ID key? And if so, I build the URL a little bit differently than I would if it was more of a generic query. The other thing I should mention is right now, this REST API wizard, it creates read-only kind of interface provider. So I would expect possibly in time we would go ahead and add to that, but this is fairly new, and for now it's read-only, and we kind of feel that's going to get the bulk of people's needs. As Dion mentioned, a lot of the use cases we're seeing are around BI, which is typically read. Okay, so there is that. It's very similar for the comic one, and finally, we also just built from scratch a JSON utility. And really, that's everything that changed out of what we looked at before. Out of the number of programs that were actually generated, really we just changed 5 of them. So at this point, what I'm going to do is go ahead and copy those change programs, so we don't have to watch me attempt to do that, because it's not going to happen. So let me just go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to go back up here. I'm just going to go ahead and paste it in. Okay, so now we've got a source. So next thing we would need to do, following along the instructions in the manual, is just go ahead and use Ant to go ahead and build, go ahead and compile these Java programs and go ahead and create a jar file. And if we look at my build XML, we can see just a couple things like the name, the location of where Open Access is installed, the location of where I installed the REST generator. The REST generator, when you download it from the website, is really just a jar file that I went ahead and extracted, and it created those tools that we're using. And finally, I'm just telling where to go ahead and create, in this case, a webinar, the data source called webinar. And really, that's all I had to change here. So let's go ahead and run it. Okay, so that ran successfully. And if we jump back and look, we can see this webinar jar was just created a second ago. That wasn't there. So so far so good as far as that. The next thing we want to do is within Open Access Server itself, we need to create a service related to this. So if we look at the management console right now, we can see there's a number of services out there, but there's none called Webinar. So we just need to go ahead and run a script to create that. And that script is actually under service setup. And again, I'm not going back to the manual just because it'd be kind of, I think, confusing to keep bouncing back and forth. But really, I'm just following the instructions in the tutorial. If we go ahead and look at this, I had to change some things here in this top kind of stanza. If I was using security as far as logging into my server, I would put my username here. You can see, again, the location of where the Open Access Server is, the location on my box of where my JRE is. Also, I need to tell it what port I want to put the service out on to be listening in, and also the name of the data source itself. So at this point, let's go ahead and run it and create that service. So I'm just going to go ahead and run create Marvel service. So that is there, and let's go back and look and see in the management console if that is in fact created for us. So you can see it's there, it's inactive. So the next thing I need to do, if we look at it, under data source settings, I need to change one under webinar. You can see it kind of gives me a default custom property which has the public key and the private key, but they're no actual value. So I already went to Marvel ahead of time. I signed up, using an email address, and now I have some credentials, and I built them here before under Marvel server. So I'm just going to copy and paste them. And I'll go back here and plug them in here and save it. Now I'm going to save my changes, and I'm going to go ahead and try to start that service. So I'm just going to right-click and say Start Webinar Service. And it looks like it's started. So the next thing I want to do is actually create an ODBC data source and see if I can connect to it just real quickly. So we'll come down here, and I'll create a new system, DSN. And I'm looking right now for my Open Access ODBC driver. And I'm going to call this one Webinar, just to match the name we've been using. This is the host where my Open Access server is, so it is in fact on the same box, so it's localhost. And the other thing is, if you remember, I said it was going to be on port 19,994. Now let's go ahead and click here to see what services are there, and you can see these actually match over here. We've got Webinar and default. Webinar is the only one that is actually usable for this. So I'm going to say OK. I'm going to apply. I'm just going to test connect to make sure I can get there. And so that's good. The other thing is, when you install the Open Access server, there is also a built-in interactive SQL tester. So let me go ahead and connect using Webinar. So I'm connected, and let me just plug in some SQL and just make sure. So I'm not going to try to type it. So I'm just going to go in with one that actually has an ID. Let's see if I can get some data there. And you can see the information coming back is basically all of it. So I have the ID, digital ID, title, issue number, and so forth. And you can see it's a little hard to read here, but you can see the data. I'll show it to you in Excel in a second. But some other things we could do if we wanted to, maybe I want to say, select the top 10. If I do that. So that'll just give me the first 10 rows that comes back from that REST API. And it looks like he's thinking a little bit there for me. So that's going to do that. And actually, just the point to make here is that you're kind of at the mercy of the API itself. And I found this one to be a little bit not the fastest one in the world that I've ever seen. So just kind of keep that in mind if you go ahead and do a test of this. So, and if I wanted to do, well, let's go ahead and jump to Excel. It would be a little bit easier to see stuff. So I'm just going to bring up Excel. I'm going to go under Data, and I'm going to do from other data sources, Data Connection Wizard. I'm going to point to that same ODBC data source we just used, Webinar. And I'll just look at comic for now and go forth. I'm actually going to modify it because, as I mentioned before, it's a really slow one. So I'm just going to go give me the top 100 columns from that comic. So if I do that, it'll go ahead and go out to the database for me. And you can see it's a little bit easier to read, but you can see just the different information that's coming back from this Marble API. And again, to do the same thing, all you need to do is follow the instructions in the manual. So let me just show you one other thing, which would be just what a join would look like. And the nice thing is you don't have to do the join yourself. It is actually Open Access itself that is kind of taking care of it for you, which is nice. It has a built-in SQL engine that can do a whole bunch like that. So let me just bring up a second sheet and do the same sort of thing. Point to the same data source and go into properties. And this time I'm just going to, basically I'm saying, let me see if it's easier to read here. From the comic table, I'm going to grab the ID, the title, the issue number, the format, which is basically whether it's a poster or a comic book or digital. I'm going to grab the full name. And from the creator table, I'm going to grab the full name of the creator itself and the resource URI. And I'm going to do a join based on that ID field, which is common to both tables. So I'm getting it from comic and creator. And to limit it, I'm just going to say, give me where the ID is equal to 6606. So let's go ahead and try that one out. And it will go out and get that information for me. So you can see this first 1, 2, 3, 4 columns are all coming from the comic table, and these last 2 are coming from the creator table. So, you really didn't get a chance to look at my code in details, but you can see as you do this yourself that the join is strictly being done by Open Access. It's nothing you have to do yourself. Basically, you go ahead and expose the tables, and it will take care of that for you. Okay, so the only other thing I might show you real quickly is I'll just go ahead and run Tableau real quick. And I'm going to click Connect to Data. We're going to use ODBC data source, and we'll use that same data source we've been using, Webinar. I'll go ahead and connect. I'm going to go ahead and do some custom SQL just because I found that this is not the quickest REST API in the world. So let's just do that. We'll limit it a little bit and go ahead and bring comic, and we'll go ahead and connect live. Okay, so we're here inside of Tableau. You can see it's gone ahead and picked up all those columns from the comic. Basically, it looks at the data types and determines or tries to guess whether it's a measure or dimension, a measure being something numeric that you can do math on, but in this case, none of these really are. They just happen to be numbers. So what I might do here is go ahead and say drag the title over. And another thing I'll probably want to do is maybe I just want to look at descriptions but I want to differentiate whether the description has like super in it for like Superman or some other superhero. So I'm going to go ahead and create a calculated field, and I'm just going to call it super underscore description. And I'm just going to look and see whether the description contains. So I bring up this, and I'll look at description, and I'm just going to say, does it have the word super in it? And I'll go ahead and create that. And so now, like, let me just grab this super description, and I'm just going to drag it to the color. So that's going to tell me these ones in blue means it doesn't have super description, doesn't have super in the description, and these kind of orange, yellow has, it definitely does. And beyond there, maybe I want to look at, say, the format to see whether it's a comic or some other format. And finally, maybe other things I might want to do here is say, that's probably good. Maybe I just want to look at the page count or something like that. But at this point, you can see, even though we're going against a REST API, it's behaving identically as if it was a true database, relational DB mesh table. So really, that's kind of what I just want to show you. Really, going back to what Dion mentioned, it really just opens up these RESTful APIs to work with BI tools that are designed to work against relational DB meshes. And really, with that would conclude the demo.
That was great, Dennis. Certainly pretty quick to be able to create a driver there. And again, just for everybody's benefit, I think Dennis showed the ODBC version, but again, very much same interface, same code would be used to create, the JDBC version as well, or the ADO.NET version too. So, it's not multiple code sets you'd need to create there.
One thing I just want to point out is with this REST wizard, it is in fact just ODBC and JDBC today. The ADO.NET is not in this right now.
Gotcha. Yeah, but you can do the bare metal with your code
base. The rest of it.
Exactly. So, that's really what we wanted to show you today, really how easy it is to build a custom driver for your application where you really have full control over the data connectivity. So, if you have a SaaS-based application or a cloud-based application or even an on-premise application, you can, really follow what over 100 other companies have done as well and use Open Access to build a custom driver there, really getting your prototype done really in a matter of days or even quicker. I know Dennis hasn't really spent much time on the Marvel one as well and was able to demonstrate, Excel integration with that very quickly. And I think implementing a full driver, QA'd and everything and ready for production in a matter of weeks. And, like everything with DataDirect, we certainly pride ourselves on being the leader in data connectivity. So, it's things like high performance, reliability, scalability is there as well. So if you build it against your APIs, and assuming your APIs are high performance, your custom driver will also be high performance. If you want to avoid the REST API you already have and really go more towards your app server or even to your database, if you want to do that, you certainly can do that as well. Single interface, single code base allows you to really build multiple drivers of supporting multiple APIs, as I said, and really cross-platform support as well. So if you want to build a Windows driver, a Linux driver, or a Unix driver, or just about anything, you can do that with Open Access. And it really is the fastest way to make your application compatible with just about any data-centric tool. So you can solve the BI dilemma that your customers are really putting in front of you. And the other thing, as I said, if you are building an application on the Force.com platform, you can even have something faster than this. We already have built a driver that connects to any application built on Force.com, including Salesforce. So you certainly can get a driver from us that would instantly give your application compatibility with just about any BI tool, ETL process, and all the other things we've spoken about today. So whether it's Salesforce or your application on Force.com, it'll basically look like just a regular database. We're using their APIs under the hood, the REST APIs and the SQL interfaces as well, so you don't have to do any of that work either. So something else to keep in mind if you are building applications on the Force.com platform. And so before we open up the Q&A here, just wanted to leave you with a few calls to action. If you're interested, you can try Open Access for yourself today. Free trial available on our website, and I've included the link here. So take note, progress.com/product/open access, and you can go ahead and download that and get started today. If you want to speak to some of our experts, including folks like Dennis, for example, and do a bit of a deeper dive, even a proof of concept, you can either give us a call or, if you prefer more of a virtual discussion, you can hit us up on the Contact Us form as well. We'd be happy to, really give you a much deeper dive and really help you through the process there as well. And as I said, if you're building on the Force.com platform, a free evaluation of that is also available for you to try. So, if any of that's interesting, by all means, go ahead and try it out today. And that's what we had today. Hopefully very interesting to folks. I know if you're challenged with these types of issues, you now see a solution in place. So by all means, take advantage of it. I'd love to do some Q&A if anybody has any questions. I believe, Marlis, you had one question, which you've posed here on the chat window as well. So Dennis, I'm gonna ask this one to you. So can you please tell us how table joins work? Does Open Access send separate requests for each table, get data back, and then perform the join in Open Access?
Yeah, that is correct. It's going to go ahead and do that under the covers like that. There is, particularly with the bare metal way, there's a lot of kind of efficiencies you can do, and you're always going to want to do your best to take care of or take advantage of the underlying API itself as far as any optimizations in there. But yes, that is correct.
Great. I have another one here as well that says, as you said, exposing data via API like RESTful service is for developers, but not for business analysts. But since OData also provides the ability to query or filter the exposed data store, can you briefly describe the pros and cons of Open Access SDK versus OData 4? Great question. Really what I would say is OData, great standard. I think with OData 4, the spec is certainly getting to a good level of maturity at this point. The reality is still a lot of tools don't yet support that standard. And so while OData 4 is a good RESTful interface for data access, it certainly does not bring the ubiquity that something like ODBC or JDBC would bring. So, if you do want to look at OData, I think it's a great solution. As a matter of fact, we are adopting it across our standard connectivity products as well. So, DataDirect Cloud, which allows you to have one driver but connects you to many different SaaS applications like Salesforce, Marketo, Eloqua, and so forth, will support OData in that as well. So what that will mean is you'll have an OData interface to things like Salesforce or Marketo and Eloqua, systems that don't have OData support today. So we're certainly big proponents of OData. We certainly want to drive that forward, especially for mobile and web use cases as well. But the reality is today, if you're faced with BI scenarios, the reality is it just doesn't have that level of support and standardization that ODBC and JDBC do. Another question I had there, we have SOAP web services. How difficult would it be to integrate with Open Access compared with REST web services? Dennis, my understanding, and certainly correct me, but I believe our accelerator today is really focused on REST first. If you wanted to use web services, you could certainly adopt the what I would say the Open Access, more of a bare metal approach, and invoke those. We certainly do it ourselves in some of the drivers we write, so it's certainly possible, but you wouldn't have the REST IP generator there. You would actually have to write more of the execute methods that I referred to before. Is that correct, Dennis?
Yeah, that's correct. And frankly, the use cases you kind of highlighted at the beginning, some of them at least are using the SOAP interface. So that was before REST how a lot of people were doing things. So it's a real common way to do it. It works very well. As you said, you wouldn't have the wizard generating, some of the source code for you. But typically what people did in that case was we have a bunch of samples out there, and, you probably a good idea to talk to, one of us as you get started, and we kind of point you to the sample that is closest to what you're doing. And at that point, you just override things like you said, the connect method itself, the disconnect. The execute method would be for things like what you're exposing as selects or inserts or updates. So very doable, and that's how most people have done it, heretofore, and so not a problem at all.
Yeah. We've certainly seen, of the 100+ implementations we've done, we've probably seen just about every permutation, whether it's file-based, web service-based, REST-based, and so on and so forth. Really, Open Access gives you the ability to do whatever you want with that connectivity. So it helps you translate, those SQL queries into however you want to respond to them on the back end. So again, web services is not a problem. You won't have the Accelerator REST IP wizard there, but again, Open Access is still solving, 90+% of the work you'd need to do to build a driver. So it still gives you a massive time savings and a quick time to market as well. And that looks like the questions we have today. Obviously, we'll follow up and send you guys, send everyone a copy of the webinar as well. And please don't hesitate. Hit the contact us form, give us a call, whatever you need. If you have more questions, we are certainly here to help and really to make you successful. So please go ahead and take advantage of it. And I believe with that, we are done today. So thanks everybody for attending, and look forward to some more webinars we have on our data access and data connectivity around things like custom connectivity, big data, SaaS integration, and many other topics. We have a very full calendar coming up this summer, so lots of interesting topics, and I hope you'll attend again. Thank you.